Alright everyone, it is starting. It is beginning right here. We are going to start pushing the Loki agenda. This was, without a doubt, the single most badass origin story of any character in One Piece history. I don't care which character we're talking about. Kaido, Big Mom, Whitebeard, Shanks, Rocks, probably even Emu himself. I don't care. You cannot top being thrown from heaven to hell as an infant on your first day of existence, on your literal first day of existence as a newborn baby, surviving, then on day one, killing one of the gigantic monsters of the underworld, and proceeding to climb hundreds of meters straight back out of hell, all on day one. This sounds so absurd. It sounds like fan fiction. It breaks the parameters of everything we've heard of in terms of crazy One Piece child character feats. We have now progressed to baby feats. What can you do as an infant? I think Loki is a lot stronger than readers are giving him credit for. I'm not saying he's the strongest character ever in One Piece or anything like that, but he definitely is one of the strongest characters that we've ever had in One Piece, and definitely one of the strongest characters alive today. And the reason I think a lot of readers aren't immediately on board with the idea of Loki being tippy top tier is because Loki was never part of the plan. See, in One Piece, we're given information beforehand, and then we have expectations of how things are sort of supposed to fall into place in terms of the hierarchy of everything. Right? We're told about the Yonko, so we expect that when we're getting into the new world, oh, Kaido, world's strongest creature, that's not a surprise. Big Mom, crazy natural born destroyer, that's not a surprise. We all expect Dragon to be top tier, right? Because we were told that this is the world's most wanted man, the most terrible criminal in the world. Most terrible criminal in the world, Luffy's father, right? That's not going to be a surprise. Even the Gorosei, you know what? We've seen these characters for a long time. Now we're beginning to realize that Emu is the big bad at the end of the story, most likely. So the Gorosei being really strong, that's not that much of a surprise either at this point. We can all accept that. But Loki, everyone's very skeptical of. Because who is this guy? Where did he come from? He's not a pirate that we'd heard of before. We just landed in Elbaf and found out there was this sleeping beast lying dormant in the land all this time. It doesn't add up. He wasn't one of the Yonko or the revolutionaries or the admirals or even the celestial dragons. This guy was not part of the plan, and so nobody is ready to accept what we're looking at in front of our eyes, which is that this is one of the most monstrous characters that we've ever seen in One Piece. When we see this guy fight, he is going to be an absolute beast, and we should not be surprised whatsoever if Loki right now scales to the level of the Yonko that we've seen in the past. I have a personal prediction right here and now. I don't know how all of the Loki discourse is necessarily going to play out after this chapter, but I'm confident that it's probably going to play out in terms of two camps. People who believe Loki is going to join the crew, and people who believe that Loki is not ultimately going to join the crew. Because if you believe that Loki is going to join the crew, well then you're probably thinking about the Luffy, Zoro, Sanji dynamic and the monster trio sort of hierarchy and their place within the crew, and so most likely you're going to downplay Loki and imagine that he's, at the end of the day, going to slot in somewhere in the 4th place spot after Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, as all new crew additions ultimately do. It's possible that right now you may not even believe that Loki is much stronger than Zoro, and that camp is obviously entitled to their opinion. We ultimately don't know where the story is going to go. Maybe that does turn out being the case. On the flip side, if you believe that Loki is not going to join the crew, then you are probably more open-minded as to how strong Loki may end up being. I personally don't believe that Loki is actually going to join the crew, and I do believe that we're going to see Loki basically neck and neck with Luffy in terms of strength this arc, and that readers should prepare for that basically being the eventuality as the events of Elbaf progress.
And backed by popular demand, the World of One Piece poster collection is being made available again. The Villains collection is sold out, but every single island from the World of One Piece is available to get, all in fantastic minimalist art style, so you can complete your collection. All past deals are also available, so you can get any 2 posters you like and get another 2 free. You can get 15 posters at a major discount, or even the entire collection for a major discount. And if you complete the collection and have a poster of every island, then we will send you the final, exclusive, unlockable poster for free, the Moon. Just email us or tag me on Twitter with your photo of your collection so we can send you the Moon. So get your posters by hitting the link in the description below.
Now enough talking up Loki's strength, let's just take the chapter's events from start to finish. So this chapter really gave us perspective on both Harold and Loki. In a single chapter, it made them both very sympathetic figures. Now Harold's story wasn't the most mind-blowing that we've seen in One Piece, but it's still a nice, charming character story along the likes that we've seen before. We all like seeing characters change, we like seeing them go from, misguided, violent, borderline evil or whatever, to becoming more wholesome characters that are more sympathetic, empathetic, peaceful, intelligent, and so on. Harold's story of basically being the strongest person around ever since birth and always exercising his strength selfishly, and all of that being changed once he meets a woman that he loves and shows him a new way of looking at life. I like that. Good for Harold. I will say that I've talked about this in several past videos, that I felt like ultimately Harold was always going to turn out to be a good character, because people have been kind of back and forth on that for some time. The first time we saw an image, that portrait of Harold, he seemed really scary, and a lot of people were very suspicious of, okay, why did Harold make Elbaf so peaceful? That's almost suspicious. It's almost like he neutered Elbaf so that the world government could force them to become world government slaves. And I've talked about this many times, but I always figured that that was never going to be the truth, that there was no malicious intent to Harold turning Elbaf peaceful, because throughout One Piece, one of the most important ideals and themes has always been that it is good for a nation to prioritize peace, harmony, connection, stability, pacifism, and all that above trying to be a violent militaristic nation. If you go back and read the ending of Dressrosa and Riku's entire final interaction with Pika, that was a heavy point that was made, that this is the mark of a good king and a good kingdom. The more peaceful, the better. So it was never going to turn out that, oh my god, Harold made Elbaf create a library, holy shit, and a classroom. The madness of this man. What a nefarious plot by this secret evil traitor. That would just be so terribly against the themes of One Piece, that Harold introducing education to Elbaf was secretly something really terrible and conniving that he was doing. No, education is good, the classroom is good, the peace is good, the harmony is good, etc. Maybe he went too far in a certain direction and all of Elbaf became too weak, although I would argue that Elbaf wouldn't actually be this weak if not for the fact that all of Harold's warriors were also killed in that battle with Loki earlier. So it's not as though Harold completely took out Elbaf's teeth, it's just that whatever the hell happened on that specific night basically wiped out all of Elbaf's military, and therefore that left Elbaf pretty much completely defenseless. Does not help either that Elbaf then went on to lock up Loki, who was their last great warrior. I am now leaning more and more towards what I talked about in previous videos, that Harold likely got Dami reversied by Imu. We know that there was some sort of interaction between Imu and Harold towards the end, because Imu talks about how Harold made some big mistake or whatever, so something happened there. I believe it's Dami Reversi. I believe that's why Harold's guards were trying to attack him, and I believe that's what Loki walked into, and then Loki was forced to finish the job. Some other things about Harold that I thought were interesting that then apply to Loki is that Harold seemed to fall in love with a woman who is not as traditionally attractive as other One Piece women, which was Ida. And then we see with Loki, Harold's son, Loki fell in love with a woman who's not as traditionally attractive, which was Lola. And I remember there were a lot of jokes going around during Whole Cake Island when we found out that the Prince of the Giants for some reason was just so infatuated with Lola, and then Lola, of all people, turned him down. But now that we're actually getting the story of Loki and his father Harold, I think that that's pretty charming, that Loki, much like his father, sees past looks. Another interesting tidbit that we got was that Elbaf is apparently really, really good at navigation, and that makes a lot of sense because it explains why certain giants are able to just traverse the seas very easily. So Dorian Brogy, for example, were able to go from Elbaf all the way to Little Garden in the Paradise half of Grand Line, and then just casually come back to Elbaf when they needed new weapons without any sort of problem. And then Loki, he traveled the seas apparently by himself for 8 years at the very least, and that makes sense if Loki was a very, very good navigator because Elbaf giants are just generally good at navigating the seas. Two important thematic or symbolic things that I really enjoyed from this chapter. One, Ida's message to Harold, which is that there's nothing in this world that should be destroyed. I love that that is set as an idea here in Harold's backstory because it's playing directly into what seems to be one of the developing themes of Elbaf. Because what is Loki's primary goal? It is to destroy the entire world. And I think we can all agree that there's something there that needs to be fixed for him. He seems to be misguided and going down the wrong path. So here in the Elbaf arc, the arc that's basically near the end of all things in One Piece, right? With Ragnarok and everything around the corner, I like the idea that it seems as though the concept of destruction versus preservation is going to be very, very important in the storyline, with it being preached in Harold's backstory, this very touching message that nothing in this world is meant to be destroyed, versus Loki with this path that he walks down where he seems to believe that everything needs to be destroyed. I'm very interested in seeing where Loki's journey goes, what he learns along the way, and how this sort of messaging connects and comes full circle. So there's still a lot to the themes of Elbaf that we need to understand. And secondly, I've found the general symbolism of the final 2 pages of this chapter, with Loki's mother casting him into hell and Loki crawling out, to be very powerful. It just felt very poetic overall, because the eyes opening and just this imagery of basically Satan's spawn, right? A devil child with the with the demonic eyes and the devil's horns. This child that really does seem to be the spawn of Satan being cast into hell, and Loki's story essentially beginning with him having to literally crawl out of hell on his own. Again, the naming of the underworld here is very, very deliberate. It paints this whole picture of this devil child that was cast out, who then had to crawl out of the underworld and proceeded to vent his rage upon the world for the rest of his life. So I love how Loki's story is getting off to a very, very tragic and very compelling start, literally from the first day of his birth. I'm super excited for us to get more of this character. He's quickly shaping up to be one of my favorite One Piece characters. He might replace Wiper as my favorite side character in One Piece, so fingers crossed for that. And lastly, we have an interesting point from the Voice of the People about what Loki's story may be a reference to, and this is from my top tier of patrons. So Jay says that the story of Loki is Oda's spin on Oedipus. Loki is a royal heir left to die on a mountain, fated to kill his own father when not recognizing him, and this may be the Domi Reversi instance, supposedly curses his kingdom by his very existence and blinds himself. That's a really interesting point, and I do think the story of Oedipus is very compelling, especially once you leave out the whole mother thing, so I think Oda kind of strayed away from that. But another thing that Jay points out is that Oedipus' story is defined by the inevitability of fate, and Loki does seem to be very obsessed with fate himself. He believes that he is fated to be the sun god who will destroy the world, and so far, everything that was fated about Loki since birth has actually come true, right? Like, Loki did end up killing his father. This also plays into why I kind of believe that Loki's story is destined for tragedy at the end of the day, but not in a tragic sense like Oedipus, where I do believe that at least in One Piece, Loki will go out feeling happy and at terms and at peace with the way that his life went, even if he does ultimately have to die for the story to reach its final stage. So with that, I'm really, really looking forward to the next chapter and the progression of Loki's story, and definitely look forward to this Tuesday's video, which will be all about Loki.